Today, we delve into one of the most tragic and heartbreaking cases ever witnessed by the police. This is the story of 5-year-old Lily Jackson, a sweet, innocent girl who lost her life in the most unimaginable way. It's a case that not only shook an entire community, but still haunts those who were involved in the investigation. It left a scar on all who came into contact with the horrific details of what happened to Lily. But the tragedy doesn't lie solely in the loss of her young life. No, the true tragedy here is that Lily's life was taken by someone who should have been her protector, someone who should have kept her safe. And even worse, it was a failure of those around her, the very people who should have ensured she was safe and loved. The failure of a system that was supposed to be vigilant, that was supposed to see the warning signs before it was too late, is what makes this case even more chilling. Lily's story is not one of a child simply falling victim to a stranger, but of a young girl whose life was stolen by the people who were supposed to nurture and care for her. A story that speaks to the darker side of trust, a story of betrayal from the people closest to her. It is a sad, gut-wrenching reminder that sometimes those we think will protect us may become the very source of our greatest danger. This story is one of neglect, of shattered promises, and most tragically, of a young girl who never had the chance to grow up. It's a story of hope, lost, and a dream of a childhood full of love, laughter, and innocence, destroyed in an instant. It's not just about the horror of what happened to Lily, but also about the broader implications of how we fail children in this society, and the dangerous consequences when that failure goes unchecked. For a 5-year-old girl like Lily, life should have been full of joy. At that age, the world should have been her playground, a safe place where she could dream of becoming a princess, sing songs, and explore the wonders of her imagination. But for Lily, that dream was never realized. Instead, the life she deserved was cut short by neglect, abuse, and, ultimately, by violence that no child should ever have to face. As we explore Lily's story, we'll learn about the people involved, the events leading up to her tragic death, and the impact it had on those closest to her. We'll uncover the disturbing reality of how a young girl, who was so full of promise, was failed by the very system and people entrusted to protect her. Lily's story isn't just about a loss, it's a reflection of what happens when we ignore the red flags and fail to act when children are in danger. And while this case is incredibly painful to reflect on, it's necessary to talk about it. We must face these uncomfortable truths if we're ever going to protect the innocent. It's crucial that we share these stories because it's only through acknowledging these deep failures that we can hope to do better and prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. The system that was meant to protect Lily, her family, the community, even authorities, failed her. And yet, by telling her story, we can learn from it. We can work toward making sure that no child has to suffer the way Lily did, and that their voices are heard before it's too late. But first, we must pause and reflect on Lily, a little girl who deserved to live, to grow, to thrive, a child who deserved a future. Instead, her future was stolen from her. And in the aftermath, we have to ask ourselves, how did this happen? How did those who were supposed to protect her let her down so terribly? Lily lived with her father, Daniel Jackson, in a modest home nestled in a quiet neighborhood. It was a small house, but it was filled with love and warmth, everything Lily needed. Despite the challenges he faced in life, Daniel was a hard-working man who adored his daughter more than anything else in the world. To him, Lily was not just a child, she was his everything. He was the one who watched her grow, who held her close when she cried, and who laughed with her when she had those funny little moments only a child could bring. Daniel worked long hours at a construction job, often laboring through the grueling heat of summer or the bitter cold of winter, just to provide for Lily. He wanted to make sure that she never had to worry, that she always had a roof over her head and food on the table. But more importantly, Daniel did everything in his power to make sure Lily always knew she was loved. No matter how tired he was, he made time for her. He'd spend his evenings reading her bedtime stories, making sure she knew that the day wasn't complete without a goodnight kiss. He was her protector, her provider, and her biggest cheerleader. Their home may not have been large or extravagant, but it was enough. It was enough because it was filled with love. Greetings from Lost Crime HQ, where you may find the most gripping and thought-provoking true crime stories. I am incredibly appreciative of everyone's steadfast support, especially from my incredible subscribers. Your interest and enthusiasm motivate us to keep delivering the important stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Make sure to click the subscribe option if you haven't already in order to receive the most recent updates. I promise you won't want to miss what comes next. We're just getting started. I appreciate you being here, and together, let's keep finding the truth. The walls echoed with laughter. The air was thick with affection, and Lily never had to question whether she was safe. Her father's love created a bubble of security around her, a bubble that, unfortunately, would one day be shattered. In many ways, Daniel's life revolved around his daughter. She was his purpose. She was the reason he worked so hard, the reason he sacrificed so much. Lily's happiness meant everything to him, and in return, Lily trusted him wholeheartedly. She felt safe in her father's arms. She knew that when he was around, the world was a much kinder place. To her, Daniel was the stronghold of her world, the foundation that held everything together. Daniel knew that life wasn't always easy. He had his struggles, just like anyone else. But he made sure that his struggles never affected Lily. He wanted her to grow up with the kind of stability he never had. Lily deserved to have a childhood filled with joy, wonder, and innocence, not the pain or hardship that so many children face. And that's exactly what Daniel wanted to give her. On weekends, they would often spend their days doing little things together, walking to the park, making crafts at home, and just enjoying each other's company. Daniel would take Lily out for ice cream after school, or they'd spend hours in the backyard, creating imaginary worlds where she was a princess and he was her loyal knight. Those were the moments he treasured the most, the moments where Lily's happiness was his only priority. But despite all the love Daniel provided, there was a darkness outside of their home that Daniel couldn't always control. Lily's mother, Amanda Jackson, and Daniel had been separated for some time. Their relationship had been strained for years before they went their separate ways. While they shared custody of Lily, it was clear that Daniel had primary responsibility for her well-being. He was the steady one, the one who could be counted on. Amanda, on the other hand, was in a place of her own struggle. She had her battles with addiction and was often absent from Lily's life, unable to provide the kind of stability Lily needed. Daniel knew that it wasn't the ideal situation, but he always tried to do what was best for his daughter. And so, Lily spent most of her time with Daniel, safe, loved, and protected. But there was still that visitation arrangement in place. And for all the challenges Daniel faced, there were moments when he questioned whether it was enough. The uncertainty over Lily's time with her mother caused him sleepless nights. But when Lily was with him, everything was perfect. He couldn't ask for more. She was his joy, his heart, and his everything. and he promised himself that no matter what happened, he would protect her, no matter the cost. At this point in Lily's life, she was just beginning to come into her own. She was learning new things every day. Her language was expanding, her curiosity was growing, and her heart was full of love. There was no doubt in anyone's mind who knew her that she was destined for great things. A child full of potential, dreams, and the kind of innocence that should have been protected by every adult around her. Daniel, a devoted single father, never doubted his commitment to Lily's well-being. His world revolved around her, and everything he did was with the hope of giving her the best possible future. He was well aware of how difficult life could be as a single parent, having to juggle the demands of work, household responsibilities, and trying to maintain a semblance of a normal life for Lily. But despite the challenges, Lily was always his #1 priority. Every day, Daniel made sure that Lily felt safe, loved, and cared for. He worked long hours at his construction job, sometimes leaving early in the morning before Lily was awake, and coming home late after she had already gone to bed. But he did it all with the hope that he could provide a better life for her, a life that would be filled with happiness, stability, and love. Still, there was one thing that haunted Daniel: Amanda, Lily's mother. Despite the fact that they had been separated for years, Amanda still had visitation rights to see Lily. It was a legal arrangement they had made during their divorce, but the situation was complicated, and Daniel's heart was constantly weighed down by a deep concern for his daughter's safety when she was with Amanda. Amanda had always struggled with substance abuse. She had battled addiction for most of her adult life, and it had played a major role in the breakdown of her marriage with Daniel. Daniel had tried, time and time again, to make things work for the sake of their daughter. But Amanda's addiction was a constant obstacle. He watched as she would promise to get better, only to relapse soon after, leaving her unable to fully care for Lily. Her addiction wasn't just a private matter, it affected everything. There were times when Amanda would disappear for days, leaving Lily confused and scared. Daniel knew the toll that instability took on a child, and the thought of Lily spending weekends in that environment filled him with dread. He had tried talking to Amanda on many occasions, asking her to get help and seeking assurances that she could provide a safe home for their daughter. But every conversation ended in frustration, with Amanda's empty promises of change and a steady downward spiral into her own chaos. Daniel had come to terms with the fact that Amanda wasn't in a position to be the kind of mother Lily needed. He had seen the signs for years: irregular visits, broken promises, and the constant cycle of hope and disappointment. The battle with addiction had left Amanda emotionally unstable and unable to provide the consistency Lily needed. Daniel had seen her in her best moments, when she truly wanted to do right by their daughter. But those moments were too few and far between. Despite all this, Daniel never wanted to completely shut Amanda out of Lily's life. He understood the importance of having both parents in a child's life, even if their relationship was strained. Deep down, Daniel hoped that one day Amanda would get the help she needed and be able to become the mother Lily deserved. But for now, that hope seemed distant. Daniel's primary concern was Lily's well-being, and he couldn't ignore the risks of sending her to Amanda's house every other weekend. Even with his reservations, Daniel had no choice but to follow the court's custody arrangement. He had to send Lily to Amanda's house for her weekend visits. He didn't want to, but it was the law, and he feared that if he didn't comply, it could lead to more legal trouble. There were times when Daniel's heart would ache at the thought of Lily going into a situation that felt so unpredictable. but he always tried to remind himself that she was still her mother. Lily, for her part, was excited about the weekends with her mom. She loved her mother, despite everything, and when the time came for her to pack her little bag, she would excitedly bounce around, eager for the time spent with Amanda. She couldn't fully comprehend the reasons why her father was always so reluctant to let her go, but Daniel always tried to reassure her, telling her it would be okay. On the weekend of December 12th, 2021, when Lily was supposed to spend her weekend with Amanda, Daniel had his usual mixed feelings. He tried to hide his concerns from Lily, watching as her face lit up at the thought of seeing her mom. She practically skipped to the door as Amanda arrived to pick her up, the excitement in her voice unmistakable. Daniel couldn't bear to dampen her spirits, so he kissed her on the forehead and told her to have a good time, although he couldn't shake the tight knot in his stomach. As he watched her leave, Daniel felt that familiar unease settling in his chest. He knew this was a delicate balance. He didn't want to deprive Lily of the chance to have a relationship with her mother, but he also feared the consequences of putting her in an environment that might not be stable. Despite all his concerns, Daniel hoped. He hoped that maybe this weekend would be different. Maybe Amanda would be in a better place, more stable, and able to provide the kind of safe environment Lily needed. Maybe this time would be the fresh start they had both longed for. But deep down, Daniel had doubts that those hopes would come true, and it was a doubt that would haunt him in the days to come. Amanda's home in a rundown part of town was hardly a place fit for a child. The walls were stained, and the floors creaked under the weight of years of neglect. To most, it was a place best avoided. But to Lily, it was just another place where she would spend time with her mother, oblivious to the dangers lurking around her. Despite the surroundings, Lily's world was still filled with innocence and love for her mother. She never fully understood the darkness surrounding her, the complexity of the environment she was in, nor the dangers she faced. Unfortunately, Amanda's boyfriend, Victor, was also in the picture. He was a man with a criminal history and a violent past. His temper was well known, and his presence in the house cast a dark shadow over what should have been a safe haven for Lily. Amanda's addiction to drugs had clouded her judgment, and she had become so consumed by her own struggles that she failed to see the harm that Victor posed to Lily. She was so lost in her own world that she didn't fully grasp how dangerous her relationship with Victor had become for both her and her daughter. Amanda's inability to prioritize Lily's safety over her personal demons was a devastating failure that no child should ever experience. Lily, trusting and innocent, didn't know the danger she was in. She was excited to be with her mother, but the environment was far from safe. There was a constant tension in the air. Amanda and Victor's violent arguments became a regular occurrence in the house. These weren't just heated words. They escalated into physical altercations that shook the very foundation of their home. Objects were thrown, windows were shattered, and doors were slammed. The chaos in the house was all-consuming. Amanda was often too consumed by her addiction to intervene, and Victor's anger spiraled into uncontrollable rage. Lily, with her big brown eyes and innocent heart, didn't understand why her mother and Victor fought so much. She only knew that when she was there, everything felt uncertain. She would retreat into her own world, finding comfort in her dolls or the small things she could control. But despite her attempts to find comfort in the small moments, the ever-present tension between Amanda and Victor was something she couldn't escape. Amanda, caught up in her addiction and blind to the danger, couldn't protect Lily from the toxic environment she had created. She didn't see how the constant violence, the loud shouting, and the threat of physical harm affected her daughter. Lily deserved a place of safety, but instead, she was trapped in a world where love was supposed to be, but violence and fear prevailed. The nightmare unfolded in the early hours of December 15th, 2021. It was a cold morning, just a few days before Christmas, and the house was shrouded in the kind of darkness that often accompanies violent behavior. Amanda and Victor had been arguing all night. Victor, whose temper had always been unpredictable, was at the boiling point. This was nothing new. These kinds of violent altercations had become frequent in Amanda's home, but this time it was different. The arguments between the two had escalated in a way that was beyond anything they had ever experienced before. Lily, who had been trying to sleep in her small bed, was caught in the crossfire. She had heard the shouting, heard the banging and crashing, but her childlike innocence told her it would all be over soon. But this time, it didn't stop. The argument between Amanda and Victor reached a breaking point. Victor, in a fit of rage, lost all control. He turned his anger on the defenseless 5-year-old girl, an innocent child who had no way of escaping the violence that was unfolding around her. Lily had no way of defending herself. She was too young, too small, and too trusting. Her mother's inability to intervene, weighed down by her own struggles, left Lily vulnerable to Victor's wrath. What followed was an unimaginable horror. Lily's life was taken so violently that it left investigators and officers shaken to their core. The brutality of the crime was beyond anything they had ever encountered. The evidence showed signs of severe abuse and neglect. Lily's body was found hours later in the small, dimly lit room she had been staying in. The marks of violence were clear. There were bruises on her delicate skin, some that had been inflicted in the moments leading up to her death. Her little body, which should have been filled with life and joy, was now cold and still. The authorities were immediately called to the scene when Amanda finally realized what had happened. By the time they arrived, it was already too late. The police officers who arrived on the scene were horrified by what they found. The home, once a place where a young child should have felt safe, was now the site of a crime that would haunt everyone involved. The officers did their best to process the scene, collecting evidence and documenting the horrors that had unfolded in that house. But the question that kept haunting them was the same one that had been plaguing Daniel. How could anyone let this happen? How had Lily been allowed to be caught in such an unsafe environment? A place where love should have been, but was overshadowed by violence and neglect? The investigation began immediately, but as the details began to unfold, it became clear that Lily's death was not just a random act of violence. It was the culmination of years of failures from those who should have protected her most. Amanda, caught in her addiction, had failed her daughter. Victor, with his violent tendencies and criminal history, should never have been allowed near Lily. And yet, despite all the warning signs, Lily had been left in harm's way, and her bright future was stolen away in an instant. The tragic death of Lily Jackson left an entire community in mourning, but it also sparked outrage. How could a mother, someone who was supposed to protect her child, fail her so completely? How could a man with a history of violence be allowed to have such a toxic influence on a young, vulnerable child? The investigation would reveal even more about the failure of the system and the heartbreak that followed. But for now, what remained was the undeniable truth. Lily Jackson, a bright, innocent child, had been taken far too soon, and no one who knew her would ever forget the joy she once brought into the world. When Daniel Jackson received the news of his daughter's death, his world shattered in an instant. The man who had dedicated his entire life to keeping her safe, the man who had worked tirelessly to give her a happy, stable childhood, was now faced with the cruel and painful reality that he would never hear her laugh again, never see her bright smile light up a room. The world that had once been full of joy, love, and possibility was now silent, cold, and full of regret. Daniel's first reaction was disbelief. He could hardly comprehend what he had just been told. Lily, his sweet little girl, was gone. His mind refused to accept it. How could it be true? How could someone so full of life and love be taken away so violently? He'd done everything he could to protect her, hadn't he? The thought that he had failed her, that he couldn't keep her safe from harm, felt like a crushing weight on his chest. Daniel began to grapple with the emotions that followed. Grief, a grief so intense it felt like a tidal wave crashing over him, leaving him breathless. The emptiness in his home, the silence where Lily's voice should have been, was unbearable. And then came the regret. The unrelenting regret that gnawed at him every day. He couldn't stop thinking about the decision he had made. He had allowed Lily to go to Amanda's house, believing it was the right thing to do, believing that this time, maybe things would be different. But now, he questioned everything. Could he have done more to protect her? Should he have fought harder to prevent the visit? To keep her away from the environment that had become so dangerous? Could he have recognized the warning signs earlier, before it was too late? Daniel's mind was filled with these painful questions, and there were no answers that could soothe his broken heart. The love he had for his daughter was so deep, so pure, that to think he had allowed her to be put in harm's way was almost more than he could bear. Daniel's emotional struggle was real and raw. The pain of losing Lily was compounded by the fact that, in his mind, he had failed her. Every time he remembered her laughter, her excitement when they played together, the way she'd hug him before bed, it felt like a knife in his heart. He would have given anything to go back, to make a different decision, to somehow protect her from the unimaginable fate that had befallen her. But there was no going back. And while Daniel's love for Lily was unwavering, the weight of his perceived failure would haunt him forever. The aftermath of Lily's death was a blur of police investigations, legal proceedings, and media coverage. Amanda and Victor would eventually face the legal consequences of their actions, but even with the swift legal action, it never felt like enough. No sentence could bring Lily back. No amount of justice could restore the life of the bright, innocent child who had been so brutally taken. The case was immediately thrust into the public eye. The horrific nature of Lily's death shocked the community to its core, and the anger and heartbreak were felt by everyone who had known her. But the legal system, as painful as it was, had to take its course. Victor, who had a long history of violent behavior, faced murder charges. His past was riddled with incidents of aggression, but somehow he had continued to maintain a presence in Lily's life. His sentence came swiftly: life in prison, without parole. Many, including Daniel, believed it was the only appropriate sentence, considering the brutality of his actions. But no matter how many years he spent behind bars, it would never bring Lily back. Amanda, despite her role in failing to protect her daughter, faced significant charges as well. Though her struggle with addiction and her chaotic relationship with Victor had clouded her judgment, it was clear that she had neglected to ensure Lily's safety. For this, she was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, but again, no sentence would undo the damage she had done. No punishment could bring her daughter back to life. The trial was a painful experience for everyone involved. Daniel, already devastated by his loss, was forced to relive every painful detail of Lily's death during the proceedings. He listened as the prosecution laid out the evidence of Victor's cruelty and Amanda's negligence. It was clear that this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a failure of responsibility, love, and protection. As the legal process unfolded, it became evident that while justice was being served, the emotional toll on Lily's family and the entire community was profound. The trial didn't bring Lily back, and the sentences handed down didn't ease the pain. There would be no closure for those who loved her. There would always be a void where her laughter, her innocence, and her bright future should have been. Justice had been served, but it was no comfort in the face of such an irreplaceable loss. Lily's story is one of unspeakable tragedy, but it is also a call to action. It's a stark reminder of how important it is to protect vulnerable children from harm. It is a reminder that we cannot ignore the signs of abuse, neglect, and violence, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult it may be to acknowledge them. We must be vigilant and proactive in recognizing when a child is in danger, and we must not stand by when we know something is wrong. Lily's death was not just the failure of one mother or one man. It was a failure of a system that should have been better equipped to protect her. It was a failure of those who had the power to intervene but didn't. And it was a failure of a society that sometimes turns a blind eye to the suffering of the most vulnerable. As we reflect on the life of Lily Jackson, we remember the bright, innocent little girl who never had a chance to grow up. We remember her laughter, her smile, and the love she gave so freely to everyone around her. And as we honor her memory, we must also take action. We must ensure that no other child faces the same fate as Lily. We must be the ones to speak up, to protect, and to take a stand against the kind of violence and neglect that took her life. Let us remember Lily's story, not just as a tragic loss, but as a lesson that we must do more to protect children, to intervene when we see signs of harm, and to be the voice for those who can't speak for themselves. Let's make sure that Lily's legacy is one of change that will keep future generations of children safe.